So this is what's been happening during my illness. Tennis lessons, my foot. I suppose I have to hand it to you for a fast worker. How did you manage it?
If you love listening to this show, please consider giving a rating and a review on Amazon Alexa or wherever you listen. We want to continue bringing you this amazing content, and part of our ability to do that means that we need a big audience. Now, it may not seem like much, but rating and reviewing the show will help more people find us, just like how you found this show. Simply on any podcast platform, search for a show, scroll down to the bottom, and push 5 stars. It's that easy. Thanks for supporting the show. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Dennis Grishin, who is the Chief Scientific Officer at Nebula Genomics. Welcome to the show today.
Thanks for having me.
All right. You're an expert in genetics and genomics and have studied biology as well as computer science. And I wonder how your background has been really instrumental in terms of the role that you play today, including, fields like new fields like computational biology that's really enabling better research modeling as well as insights.
Yeah, I think biology generally as a field has been shaped tremendously in the past, more than a decade by now by, this intersection that's becoming increasingly large with computational sciences. And genomics was a field that was, leading this new type of biology because it was the area where large amounts of data have been generated that, need to be all analyzed and made sense of. So, I would say, purposefully chose to acquire some expertise in those areas to be able to work at this intersection of biology and computer science. And I think that prepared me quite well for my role as chief scientist at Nebula Genomics.
Well, it's really interesting because I think you're one of the few that I have come across that have really kind of a really balanced discipline in terms of background that has both. Usually it's, one that's leaning towards just the biology side or the computer science side. So it's terrific. And I feel that, I think in the last, I would say 5 to 7 years, that field has really blossomed quite a bit. And certainly you've really helped in that regard. Coming back to specifically within the field of genomics, I think all of us know that Professor George Church initiated the personal genome project some 16 years ago. But I wonder, since then, I wonder if the DNA test that helps us to, kind of unravel the genomics aspects, if they actually have delivered on the promise, because I think one of the claims that you guys put out on your website is that today's test only decode 0.02% of our DNAs, and I wonder why that is the case.
Yeah. I think when we talk about technologies to decode human DNA, we should think about them broader, not just, the direct-to-consumer space. And if you think about, the application research, that has been such a unprecedented success, where, just, 10 years ago, DNA sequencing might have been something that only a few specialized labs have been doing. Today, it has become something that almost every researcher in biology touches on to some extent. So it's a technology that's really revolutionized biological research. And separate from that, there's, the clinic, the medical application of sequencing technologies, where the adoption has also been greatly increasing, facilitating, things like diagnosis of rare disease patients, as well as sequencing of tumors for cancer patients to give them a better personalized therapies. And then again, separate from that, we have this whole direct-to-consumer space where Nebula Genomics is active. And that space, really appeared, I would say, around 15 years ago with companies such as 23andMe that back then launched those called the genotyping tests, which you alluded to, that they caught around 0.02% of the human genome. And the technology that those companies using remained pretty much unchanged over the past 15 years. the costs have been decreasing. Those tests have become really affordable. Millions of people have by now taken them, but the test itself hasn't really changed. It's remained, very limited to a really small fraction of the genome. And I think partially the challenge is that from a marketing perspective, the consumers don't really understand the difference between DNA tests. That there's one that decodes really a fraction, and there's another one that decodes really 100% of the DNA. So the adoption has been really slow of more comprehensive DNA tests. And that's essentially what we're trying to change at Nebula Genomics. We're trying to raise the awareness that there are differences between DNA tests. There are now much better tests available that can provide much more insight in regardless what you're looking for as a customer. And really whole genome sequencing is the way to go. That's DNA testing of the future. So we try to raise awareness of that, as well as bring the prices down as much as we can and make it really accessible and affordable to as many people as possible.
Yeah, I think the general. I think the pattern that I'm seeing is that there's just an incredibly exponential growth. I think in terms of the techniques and the technologies, and I think your startup Nebula Genomics is just one of many. I think is trying to really profoundly reap the benefits of that. Specifically, I think 23andMe and Ancestry DNA, when they started out, it was more oriented towards more of a curiosity of kind of wanting to know. But yet, I think to your earlier point is, the genomics aspect has really tremendous application across many areas aside from just the consumer side. So you guys are, to me, more on the research and clinical side, and hence you guys are able to do more. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about the company and how you guys are using whole genome sequencing that's decoding 100% of someone's DNA and producing something like 10,000 times more data than the other typical standard DNA test.
Yeah, with this whole genome sequencing, we are really able, as you said, to give our customers much more benefits as possible with other DNA tests. And this is also made possible by, the tremendous advances that are being done on the research side. In particular, if you just think about scientific studies that are being conducted, finding new associations between certain genetic variants and predispositions to various traits and conditions, the pace at which this research is being done and published has been really growing a lot in the past years. And today we have really almost every day there's a new study being published identifying new genetic variants that are linked to various traits. And because we do whole genome sequencing and essentially decode all the genetic variation in human genome, we're able to take those studies that are published every day, extract that knowledge, and create personalized reports to our users. And not do it just once, as you would get with a 23andMe test, but to really release new reports. We do it in a weekly manner right now, where a customer receives those reports based on studies that have been published just last week. And it's really enabled to stay on the cutting edge of science and learn how the latest science applies to their DNA. And that's, I think, kind of the core of our service, which has really excited many of our users. And that's something that they cannot get anywhere else today.
Yeah, I mean, I think for those that are listening, what you just described is actually really significant because not only being able to actually model and replicate the kind of research that's being published on these peer-reviewed journals, but to your point, the pace of these researches is really increasing. So to stay on top of those research and those tools and techniques, and then bring it into an application process within your tool set. I think it's within your genome exploration tools as well as the Nebula Research Library. And that's a lot of work. I mean, and again, the benefit to the end consumer, especially on the enterprise side, is significant because, again, to your point, literally it's getting reflected off like last week's or even a few days of whatever research that came out on various types of publications. So to that end, I mean, as a chief scientific officer, that's a pretty big endeavor, right? And it's a continuous endeavor. How are you guys able to support that and have sustainability to make sure you're not missing something?
You may also like our quarterly Astor Perkins event that brings some of the most notable experts and category-leading startups in their area of sustainability and human survival on Earth and in space. To register, visit astorperkins.com/events.
Yeah, it's I guess a big task to provide our customers with as much insight into the DNA as possible, and we have been, I guess, refining our ability to do that over the last couple of years since we have been in existence. And we have a team of scientists with PhDs who read all this literature, curate the most interesting, most impactful research, and help us create the type of reports that we deliver to our users on a weekly basis. And I think we are a very small company compared to others that are more established, like 23andMe and Ancestry.DNA. And I think I'm personally quite proud of what our team is able to achieve, given its relatively small size, and relative to the benefits that I think we're actually providing to our customers.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, certainly, could your customers set RSS feeds and receive some of these articles? But it takes time to read through these technical and scholarly journals. So to be able to pick out the ones that are actually most relevant and then summarize and provide that into these research libraries really provides a tremendous amount of value. A question I have. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that our core focus was really, makes that knowledge that is being published very accessible to our users, because there are two challenges. One, it's usually behind paywalls, so you cannot just, as a private citizen without affiliation with the university, just go and read research papers. You will have to pay for that. And second, that's obviously written all in expert language, and most people won't be able to understand the results of those papers. So our goal here is really take the core results from behind those paywalls, explain them, and make them very accessible and understandable to the average non-biologist, and then applies those results to their DNA and enables them to benefit from it.
Yeah, and I think the end benefit, aside from being cutting edge, is that you're really helping to educate your multi-stakeholders in terms of the value that can be potentially derived. And to your point, being able to identify certain variants and how that ties to a particular type of disease. I mean, it's huge. And of course, we haven't even talked about applications around CRISPR gene editing, as well as multi-bacterial gene editing as well. Let's talk a little bit about ownership of data, privacy, and protection, which has been a real issue. So some of the more kind of legacy or incumbent players on the consumer side have taken these DNA tests from millions of people, and I believe correct me if I'm wrong, but according to their policies, that belongs to the data that's derived belongs to those companies versus the individuals. And I think this is where Nebula Genomics is really trying to differentiate itself around enabling privacy first. So if you could talk a little bit about the approach and how you guys are able to support this.
Yeah, so that's been, aside from this whole focus on whole genome sequencing versus other types of technologies, the focus on privacy has been, the second, I guess, pillar of what we are trying to build on. As you said, in the past, many leading genetic testing companies have been criticized for their privacy policies and data use policies. In some cases, it was justified. Sometimes, maybe it was less justified. I think at the end of the day, many of those companies want to do good things with the data, namely, just make it available for researchers so we can better understand diseases, etc. This will help, everyone. But the approaches that have been adopted to accomplish that often make people feel like, they're being excluded and have no control over what happens with their data. And we're essentially trying to pioneer a different approach where we utilize different cryptographic technologies to enable our customers to have much more control over the data. So it's not just a question with us about, having a certain privacy policy that is, maybe more stringent. It's really about building, in addition to actually having such a privacy policy, also building technology that really puts, the control over personal data in the hands of the owners of that data. We published quite a bit on that topic. There was just recently, a few weeks ago, an article we published in Nature Computational Science where we present a system that essentially enables researchers to analyze data in a very privacy-preserving manner without really infringing the privacy of those individuals in any way. And we have been also, already deploying some of those technologies to our users to enable them to have more control. So right now, for example, we have a beta test going on with a company called Oasis Labs, which is with a company that specializes in privacy-preserving secure computing. And part of this beta test is enabling our users to have this data being managed by essentially Oasis Labs, be located in so-called secure computing enclaves, where access to it is very controlled and very limited. And enables really our users to stay much more in control, even when it comes to us, the companies that generate the data. Even us, we have to ask to permission every time we want to look at the data, generate new reports. We have essentially need to get permission to do that.
Yeah, I mean that's quite painstaking, right? To have to ask the customers for permission every single time. But truthfully, I mean that's really the way it should be done. And I think some of the techniques, I'd be curious to know. There's been quite a bit of advancement since like homomorphic encryption and other methods where you really don't even need to see the database itself to be able to run queries against it, or even have certain computational values generated from it. So I'm curious to know how you guys are supporting some of these privacy preserving technologies, and because it is a fast evolving situation, and certainly with GDPR in Europe, I think there's a lot more, really resources behind that.
Right. We explored those techniques. So homomorphic encryption, I think there are generally kind of two basic types that one might want to distinguish as fully homomorphic encryption that enables all kinds of operations to be performed on data while it remains encrypted, but it's very, very slow. So it's still not really usable for what we're doing, given the large size of our data that we need to be computing on. But there's also partially homomorphic encryption that allows only certain limited operations, and we have been employing that technology. So that paper that you recently published that I just mentioned, there we, for example, developed and described systems that uses various partially homomorphic systems to run certain queries on the data in a privacy-preserving manner. So that's one of the technologies that we've been working on. And the other one, and that's this beta with Oasis Labs that I also mentioned, it's an alternative approach that instead of this algorithm-based privacy relies on hardware-based privacy guarantees. So it relies on certain properties of currently existing microprocessors, Intel or AMD, and certain secure domains, enclaves that can be created with those processors, where essentially the core idea is that there's kind of a third party, like a cloud provider, that owns a computer, and the data is kind of on their computer, but they still don't have the access to the data. Right. So it's their computer and being computed on by their computer, because it stays in this secure environments inside the memory. So that's a kind of an alternative that offers better performance. There's certain disadvantages, but we are currently beta testing that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm personally very excited about secure enclaves, and we certainly had one of the leading startups in that area come and speak to us as well. Let's talk a little bit about one of your product lines, Deep Genetic Ancestry, and how it's actually able to do a deeper dive on the ancestry with the full Y chromosome and the mitochondria DNA sequencing analysis relative to your other competitors.
Yeah. So what whole genome sequencing essentially enables is it records essentially all the DNA, and what it then enables is that this essentially ancestry tracking based on mutations that are much more less common than what you can essentially check for using a genotyping array. And when you look at mitochondria, for example, or Y chromosomes, there you have mutation rates that can be essentially much higher than you can possibly just design a microarray chip for. So what you would like to do is really sequence it in full, which is what we do, and that enables you to really track your maternal and paternal ancestry lines in much more depth, and also going much further into the past than what is possible with genotyping technology. So we have partnered with a bunch of companies that essentially specialize in ancestry. One being, family tree DNA. The other one being Y4, a company specializing in Y chromosome analysis. And they essentially help us take our data and provide our users with this very, very in-depth analysis of paternal and maternal ancestry, which is, a new type of ancestry analysis that is really not available with common, more well-known genetic tests like, 23andMe and Ancestry DNA.
So I'm going to go a little bit off tangent and ask a little bit more kind of interesting questions that may be adjacently related. One is that, I think there are some researchers that believe that just focusing on the genetics and genomics is somewhat kind of, looking at it from the rear view mirror in terms of historical or, what's there, but it doesn't necessarily give you a view or perspective or really laser X-ray view of what's happening now. And that's where the proteome and particularly things within the blood becomes very important. So I wonder how you guys kind of think about genomics relative to, work around rDNA, mRDNA, as well as, just general things that really gives us more clues about what's really happening.
Don't forget to visit astorperkins.com to register for our next quarterly events. Past and current speakers include Julianne Hough, actress, dancer, and winner of Dancing with the Stars, Damian Vaughn, former NFL player, Neil Gregory, Chief Thought Leadership Officer at the IFC World Bank, and many more. To register, visit astorperkins.com and click on Events.
Yeah, that's a very good point, and we've been singing about that a lot recently. We have plans, and then I don't want to disclose too much about future product launches, but we do have plans to supplement our DNA tests with many other different types of tests. And the core idea there is being genetic essentially tells you about your predispositions. It doesn't really actually tell you whether you have a trait or have a disease, with some exceptions where there's 100% penetrance. But usually for complex common diseases, it just tells you about predisposition. So we have single genetic tests that can tell you about all your predispositions. And then after that, you can essentially take specific tests that look at various markers that then actually tell you that did the predisposition result in you having that condition or not. And we are very much looking into supplementing our genetic testing with many other types of marker tests.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. I mean, the more specific you get with biomarkers, that'd be hugely valuable. Let's go a little bit further tangent to traveling in space. I think with aspirations, whether we think it makes sense or not, of terraforming things like the moon and certainly Mars, means that humans, at least in current form genetically on Earth, may not be optimal for oxygen-constrained places or places that have high volatility or extreme spectrums of cold and hot, and then of course our ability to actually withstand various forms of harmful radiation. When we think about those kind of extreme cases, how should we think about genetic modifications and the kind of potential tools and techniques that are starting to really advance in that field?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, even if we don't think about, space travel, I think there's a lot we can do in terms of genetic engineering that will just make us healthier if we stayed on Earth, right? There was just a recent paper I think I saw in Nature where they actually showed in chimpanzees, I believe, that certain genetic modification, just do it once and then it helps you to permanently reduce the level of certain lipids in blood and reduce arteriosclerosis and diseases like that. So there's, I think, a lot that we already know how those diseases work, and we know what genes are involved and what genes need to be modified to really make us permanently healthier if we did the genetic modification. And this can already be done, and I think there's just now a process that needs to take place in terms of ensuring that it is safe and the benefits outweigh potential risks. And then I believe that will start happening in the coming decades. I think now with COVID, we actually had a big I think, jump forward that we have done in terms of kind of getting closer to this idea of genetic modification. Also, COVID vaccines do not modify DNA itself; they bring in RNA, so they still modify the expression of certain proteins. And I think this will just accelerate this whole process, and the timeline when those type of products will become available that really suppress the activity of certain genes or activate them either through genetic modification or just introduction of RNA into the cells. And I think first it will happen to just make us healthy where we live, but in the future, as you said, there are prospects to make it possible for humans to better exist in other environments. I think, for example, George's lab has been investigating tardigrades, which are certain types of animals that are really miraculously resistant to all types of damage, like radiation damage and dehydration. So there's a lot of ongoing work to better understand their genetics and how we can potentially use that to make ourselves more resistant to all types of external, damages.
Yeah, I think going back to your earliest comment around the applications is really, the diagnostic, the clinical side is just massive, and the research side. Can you give us, maybe because of time constraint, maybe like one example of how you guys are working with more on the institutional or enterprise side in terms of some of the solutions and services?
I think at this stage, we mostly really focus on the direct-to-consumer, as discussed earlier, raising awareness of what is whole genome sequencing available, et cetera. We are not doing that much on the enterprise side yet, but the vision is really to have this large data set of whole genome sequencing data that is just much more comprehensive than what other companies have, set to much more limited tests. And then in collaboration with our users, many of whom are very altruistic and interested in participating in research, together with them, then work with pharma and biotech companies to bring together, those people with their comprehensive genetic data sets, plus in the future possibly also other types of biomarkers, and really help better understand diseases and possibly identify new drug targets. So that's, I think, the long-term vision for where we're going. And I think whole genome sequencing there will really overcome challenges that other companies have faced to have tried to do the same, but with much more limited data.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree with you more. And from a sequencing in the sense of process sequencing, it makes sense in terms of gathering the data from the consumer first, so you have a large enough data set and learnings before you can actually start to be able to add value to some of the enterprises and so forth. So that makes perfect sense. My last question for you is around lessons learned, and it could be more experimental, scientific, or it could just be project or product related types of failures and kind of lessons and insights that you gained that you can share with others.
Yeah, I think the biggest lesson we probably learned is on the marketing side, actually. So we have a very strong, I think, team of scientists, and we really see the value of what we're doing. So we initially, when we started the company, we just thought we just release a product, everyone would immediately understand what it's about, what tremendous value it brings, and it will just sell like hot pancakes without us having to do anything. That didn't happen at all, and we realized that we really need to put a lot of effort in marketing and education to really get the message out there, and we really make it understandable to many people. And only after we did that, I think our business changed its trajectory, and just the growth increased a lot. So that was just, for me personally as a scientist, I guess, an interesting lesson to learn, because even if you're selling genomes, the lessons are kind of similar as if you were selling some very much more mundane products. Marketing is important.
Well, it's not surprising because because we focus on deep tech, we tend to speak with mostly former professors, current professors, postdocs, and PhDs. And, I think from this core science and technology side, it makes perfect logical sense. But to actually present that and to persuade various different buyers of different stakeholders, it's a tricky thing. I love actually hearing that from a scientific officer around that. So thank you for that. And with that, I've been joined by Dr. Dennis Grishin, who is a Chief Scientific Officer at Nebula Genomics. Thank you for joining today.
Thank you very much.
If you've enjoyed this episode, take a moment to rate our show on any podcast platform that you listen to. Scroll down to the bottom and push 5 stars. It's that easy. And as always, thanks for listening.